episode is brought to you by Premensal.
We've got some beautiful research coming through which teaches us about how the people who are actually having the best sex, the best relationships with themselves and enjoying their lives the most are women from midlife onwards.
Welcome to another episode of Thriving in Menopause, brought to you by Prevention Australia. I'm Zoe Mernier, the editor of Prevention, and today we're exploring a subject that deserves far more open, compassionate conversation. And that's pleasure, intimacy and connection during menopause and midlife. Joining me today is Addiene Cobcroft, a clinical sexologist and somatic psychotherapist whose work is deeply rooted in helping women reclaim pleasure, navigate hormonal changes and come home to their bodies with empathy, joy and a bit of science as well. Addie is also one of the experts leading a bold and brilliant conversation at this year's Beaker Street Festival in Tasmania in a sold-out event called Come Again, An Evening of Sex and Science. Gotta love that title. Addie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, your background is incredibly rich, from gender philosophy and trauma therapy to somatic healing and sexuality. Can you tell us a bit about your journey into this work and what led you to focus so much on pleasure and body-based wellbeing for women?
Sure. Well, I mean, as a woman, I'm totally passionate about women's lives and women's experience. And I mean, my own personal and professional journey has totally led me on this roundabout journey, which has been so rich and fulfilling. And in the trying to figure my way through how to have a good life myself and witnessing women everywhere living lives that were perhaps not quite as they'd been set up to believe life was going to play out for them. I, being a curious soul, have just followed the trail of breadcrumbs to figure out how do we support ourselves and each other to live better, richer, deeper, more fulfilling lives generally and very specifically.
Sounds like a good plan to me. Now, just to backtrack a little, you're part of this exciting Beaker Street event combining sex and science. I mean, why do these two need to be in the same room more often, especially for women in midlife?
Well, we women who are in the midlife phase at this point in history are so fortunate because we are the women who are doing the research, we are the doctors, we're, in many ways forerunners for hopefully generations to come in forging new understanding of what women's bodies and women's lives do, which is different to what we knew before. That the science and the research that is being done on women's lives, women's bodies is new, and it's teaching us that the assumptions that were made before, and a lot of which was just literal assumptions because research was only done on men's bodies up until the last couple of decades, was not incorrect and not supporting women's experiences and wellbeing and health and lifestyles. So the bringing together of sex and sexuality and pleasure and women's bodies, particularly with science, is supporting us to understand ourselves better, look after ourselves and each other better, and know more about how to enjoy ourselves and our life, as well as being healthy.
Absolutely. So let's talk about pleasure. Menopause often brings big changes to how we feel in our bodies, emotionally, physically, sexually. What are some of the most common myths or misconceptions that you hear from women around sort of sex and pleasure at this stage of their lives?
Well, I mean, it's very common for women to, in this culture which absolutely adores youth and abhors old age, to believe that we're done and we're past it and we're too old and that our time has and our bodies have failed us and we're no longer as relevant and as capable and as functional as young people and young bodies can be. And it's just not true. We've got some beautiful research coming through which teaches us about how the people who are actually having the best sex, the best relationships with themselves and enjoying their lives the most are women from midlife onwards.
Right. Well, that's good to know. I mean, I guess there's a lot of we have a lot of wisdom, let's face it. So do you think that's what it comes down to, and like not caring about things that we would care about in our younger years?
I think that plays a huge part in it, Zoe. Wisdom, I love thinking about as pattern recognition, that, what wisdom actually is like, I know myself better. I know what to expect. I know the world better and what to expect. I've had more experiences. And so a person who is aging is going to be able to understand what works, what doesn't work, and that not caring as much about what people think is so important. And that's what really comes through women in midlife, is that dropping away of the cares and the bothering what other people think, and the trying and the showing up in support of other people's well-being and life at the expense of our own. And, I hear all sorts of versions of how women in midlife are describing themselves and their attitude. And I love the characterization of, the woman who walks out the door, lights a match and throws it over her shoulder, which kind of characterizes midlife.
Absolutely. Now, I think a lot of, a lot of the things you've just said, women would like to be there, but maybe aren't quite, because hormonal shifts can bring, about everything from low libido to, physical discomfort to self-consciousness about our changing shapes. What are some of the ways that you help women reconnect with their bodies and their sensuality, I guess?
Well, it's a complex picture, because bodies are unique. We all move through unique lives, and we carry what we carry from our own lifetimes and our own physiology. But across the board, we all hold our stress and our trauma in our bodies, which is one of the most unsexy experiences you could possibly have. Physical pain, self-doubt, shame, all of those negative ways of relating to ourselves and feeling ourselves in our bodies. And then you pile on cultural narratives of not enoughness and women's body shaming, particularly aging women's body shaming. So, the way I would work with people to move through that lifetime of build-up of, holding stuff in bodies, is to develop a sense of safety, develop a connection with the body, to, ultimately work through whatever it is that is being held in your unique body. And through that self-knowing, there comes this beautiful new relationship with the self, a knowing of what I feel in my body, what works, what doesn't work in this body, in this person, in this life. And ultimately, by building up safety and trust with themselves, people then move into a space where pleasure is possible. And the pleasure that is experienced in a body which carries less trauma, less stress, and, in a sense of well-being that believes that I deserve pleasure, which is something that a lot of women, particularly aging women, don't necessarily have a sense of. That then grows, and it becomes this beautiful blossoming of the capacity to understand that my body deserves pleasure, myself deserves pleasure. And so it's kind of like a two-part situation, where it's, decreasing, diminishing stress and trauma held in the body, increasing capacity and awareness of how to experience pleasure.
Yeah, so let's just unpack some of those. Obviously one of the things you speak about is the breaking down of shame. So what role does shame play in our sort of disconnection from our pleasure, and how do we begin to move past it and regain that trust in our body? How much time do we have?
All stuff. Shame it's typically chronic, and it's typically held in the body, and it's held in the mind as beliefs of, lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem. And so there's a lot of work to be done there around identifying what the beliefs are that individual people carry. What is it that's holding me back? What am I ashamed of? Is that true? Is that real? And most of the time it's not. And even when we do regrettable things or we have regrettable choices that we've made in our past, it doesn't make us a bad person. It makes us a person who's responded to the conditions of our life and the world which we've moved through. Finding ways of reframing the self-belief and then allowing those to unblock our felt relationship with our body, because when we're carrying shame, when we're holding shame, we carry that in our bodies, and then that becomes prohibitive to experiencing even a neutral relationship with the body, let alone pleasure.
So you help people deal with this through somatic therapy, which I'm certainly hearing a lot more about it, but I hadn't heard much about it in the past, and I think many people may not be familiar with it. Can you explain what it means exactly and how it can sort of support pleasure and vitality and confidence during this transition?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, fortunately, we are now we have this word somatic in our lexicon, which means, soma is of the body. Somatic is the way that we feel, the way we experience our body. And, one of the key pieces there is, in order to do any somatic work, to have somatic awareness, I need to feel safe enough to be in my body. So by working with somatic awareness, by bringing ourselves back to our body, noticing that our body has all of these rich, amazing feeling messages that it transmits throughout every day, that I can get to know myself, get to know my body, and work with what is present in my life, increase my sense of safety, get myself into access to a relationship with my body that increases self-kindness and helps me to, move into all the really important stuff like consent. What do I actually want? What do I actually not want in my body, in my life? How do I know that? I know that because my body tells me. And so, this huge, amazing field of somatic therapy is teaching us how to actualize a lot of the therapy that has historically been, helpful conceptually, but not creating huge changes in the world, in people's lives, because concepts will only get us so far. And the body, which is our vehicle of experience of life and our vehicle for pleasure and shame and all of the, myriad of feelings, it's like we need to be connected with in order to be able to understand how to make the changes that we need to make in order to heal and grow.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of women now are like, well, gee, I would love some somatic psychotherapy. But for those that perhaps it's not accessible right now, what are some sort of basic exercises or things that they could try to become, more connected to their bodies and more aware?
Yeah, absolutely. And I highly encourage anybody to, explore the journey of getting to know your body in whichever way you can, whatever's accessible. A practice which I find really helpful as a baseline, as a way of getting to know, what is my relationship with myself like, would be to just tune into the felt sense, which is terminology that we use in somatic therapy. It basically means the sensations that I'm feeling in my body. And, it's very like a body scan, which anybody who will have done mindfulness will probably understand. But rather than it being a directive, let's start with one end of the body and work through what I'm noticing in the various parts, it's more of a random flow. So tuning into what feeling am I noticing anywhere in my body, and then allowing that to, ideally we do it in a place where you feel safe enough to be able to articulate what you notice, because when we actually say aloud what we notice in our body, then we're connecting up the feeling with the brain in new and different ways. And so naming the sensations, naming which part of my body I'm feeling it in, and starting to develop those neurological pathways between conscious understanding and the physical body to start to bring those feelings that are rich and present in every moment up into our conscious awareness of how we're experiencing life moment to moment.
Love it. So we know menopause can also be a deeply emotional transition. What do you see in your work around the intersection of emotional health, trauma, and sexuality?
Ooh, yeah. Well, emotional health, trauma, and sexuality are so deeply linked. We know from recent research into particularly women's bodies, women's sexuality, women's health, that emotional connection is one of the foundational pieces of turn on for women, of connection with sexual partners, connection with myself if I'm self pleasuring. If I'm feeling in an open and receptive emotional state, I am going to have a body which is turning on, which is connected, which is lighting up in relationship with my partners or myself. And if I'm feeling the opposite, if I'm feeling emotionally shut down, if I'm feeling resentful, if I'm feeling low self-esteem, shame, like we talked about earlier, then what those things do is they form blockages in my capacity to be able to contact myself, my own feelings, my own arousal and turn on in ways which actually light me up and make me available for pleasure and sexuality. And so then depending on the context, younger women typically have those beautiful kind of cycling times of the month when bodies feel erotically charged in ways which drop off in midlife and moving into later life, which has pros and cons, because if we are feeling just physiologically aroused, we're more likely to be able to push ourselves into sexual experiences which don't necessarily align with our emotional world and our cognitive understanding of what we want and what we deserve in our life and our relationships. And in midlife, there is usually a dropping off of that automatic responsive desire.
Mm.
I think that gets misinterpreted really frequently as I'm no longer a sexual being and sex is no longer relevant to women menopausal, postmenopausal, which is so wrong. Because what actually can happen, and there's a lot of research about this, which shows that if we are no longer pushing ourselves into sexual encounters which aren't aligned with the truth of the body and the self, then what can happen is, more self-knowing. And we need that fortitude in order to be able to say no to things that are not okay, so that then we can start to develop a sense of safety and what a yes might actually look and feel like. And lead us into realms of desire which we may not have necessarily accessed at all in younger life.
Well, that's positive. So, I guess looking at women in long-term relationships, there are so many things at work there. There's stress, there's the parenting, that all the stuff that's going on in midlife, fatigue, as well as the shifting hormones. So how does what you're saying sort of look in a long-term relationship of couples wanting to sort of keep connection and desire alive together?
Yeah, this is a great question. Oh, well, change is something which is necessary and wonderful, and long-term relationships which make it through midlife typically involve the woman herself and her partner both being receptive and open to change and being willing to explore and move with her through the changes that are happening physiologically in her body. And, that can open a depth of relationship which is unlike what typically happened previously. So in these long-term relationships, no matter what, sexuality setup we have going on there, if there's a woman involved, her body is going to change and her body is going to need to be tended to in a way that it probably always did, but she could get away with not paying attention to earlier.
Sure.
And, by supporting her, by allowing her spaciousness, fatigue is not sexy. Being, loaded up with the mental, emotional, family load is not sexy. So supportive lovers of midlife women are absolutely going to also change and go through that acknowledgement and regrouping around picking up the pieces and allowing her more space, encouraging her to change, encouraging her to back herself, and to step into, the fabulous woman that she can be for the whole, second half of her life.
Sounds amazing. I really, I love all this. It's great. Now, I mean, obviously that's long-term relationships where couples are changing and shifting together. I mean, other women or maybe entering entirely new relationship dynamics, whether they're dating again after divorce or maybe navigating ethical non-monogamy or rediscovering themselves in other ways. What are some empowering ways that these women can approach intimacy in midlife?
Well, I mean, again, that theme of change, like it's going to be different. It's a different time of life. And there's, I think younger women and women generally have been culturally set up to be in service. And the big and very valuable shift that I hope to see in women everywhere across the age range, but particularly in midlife, is to allow ourselves to back off from service and to allow ourselves to receive care, support, nurturing, pleasure, and to allow it in, to find ways of receiving and to know that particularly if we are dating, if we're looking for partners or if, somebody shows up, to tune in instead of with an awareness of what are they like, who are they, what do they want in me, do they like me, which is, a very classic female experience, to look outside ourselves and wonder if we are good enough for the other person or the whatever context, you name it.
Yeah. Instead,
to shift to what we call in psychology an internal locus of control, where my sense of being and self motivation comes from internal awareness rather than this hyper focus on the external. And so to lean into, how do I feel when I'm spending time with that person? How do they treat me? Is it good enough for me? Is it what I want? How do I even know what I want? And again, we tune into our bodies and we find, does it feel good inside my body when that thing happens? Or if I run a simulation in my mind about that thing happening, is it something that is aligned that I like, or is it something that feels yucky? And if it's yucky, don't do it. If it feels great, do more of it.
So simple when you put it that way. And finally, what's one thing you wish every woman in her 40s, 50s and beyond knew about her sexual self?
Well, the best is yet to come. I really love, if we're thinking about, I hearken back to kind of Jungian paradigms of archetypes. And one of the things that we've been absolutely robbed of is the phase of life which came between, motherhood and service and the crone, which is the maga, which is the magician. It's the phase of life where we show up and we have got all of our wisdom and our experience, and whatever life circumstances we have built us to be the woman who is ready to actually go out into the world and create the magic of our life. And that includes the pleasure that we experience in our sexuality, in our daily lives, in everything. I mean, our sexuality is really just an expression of our relationship with ourself and the world. So if we can, return to the wonder of childhood, at this phase of life and, contact a sense of everything is pleasurable. The universe that we live in is amazing and delightful. And we can translate that across the board, and where it can deeply culminate is in our sexuality and our sexual relationships.
How wonderful. Well, Addie, thank you so much for your insights, your wisdom and your warmth today. Your work is a powerful reminder that intimacy doesn't have to have an expiry date, and that joy, curiosity and connection with ourselves are still available to us at every stage of life. And as you say, it sounds like the best is yet to come if we just make a few smart moves.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really enjoyable conversation.
Now, you can find out more about Addie and her work via the Beaker Street Festival website or her private practice, which we'll have in the show notes. And if you're enjoying Thriving in Menopause, make sure to follow, rate, review and share the show. I'm Zoe Mernier. See you next time.